One of the other things that I want to be able to speak to is your bravery and your confidence, because I think that's one of the biggest things that limit people when they're thinking about venturing out, when they're thinking about corporate portfolios, when they're thinking about their next steps. When you get walked into that room, it is a gut punch. All of a sudden, your world gets turned upside down. You're starting to think about all the responsibilities and things that you have to be able to see to. It can take away a certain level of confidence. And if you
Yeah.
don't have that confidence is one of the main things to get you that next step and that next job. So how did you deal with that? How did you manage that? Because it's like you said, when it comes out of nowhere, it's just, wow, what do I do now?
Yeah. So in terms of the layoff, I will say I was in a really fortunate position. And I think this speaks to something that folks with full-time corporate jobs should also think about. Like everybody says your network is your net worth, but I think especially in this job climate, like you said earlier, it really is. People are going to get jobs now through networking and through relationships and through, I mean, you should think of every customer interaction, partner interaction as effectively almost an interview. Any great client deliverable you produce is almost like a case study for you being able to maybe work with this person in another capacity later on. So I was very well connected and still, I mean, I think I still am, but I was pretty well connected when I was at Facebook. And I actually had a really close friend who was an advisor to a startup, and they were actually looking to hire a vice president of customer success at that startup. When I was laid off, I kind of had, and they had kind of wanted me to join prior, but I told them, no, now is not the time. But I kept those relationships warm. So then when the layoff happened, they had that role and we kind of co-created it together, designing with me in mind. So I was in an incredibly fortunate position to be able to do that. But I think speaking more to having the confidence when I got to the point in my last startup that I was building where I realized I'd need to find work. Yeah, there is a point where you think to yourself, why me? Why would someone want to work with me? I think maybe that's why, to be completely frank with you, maybe that's why I went the Upwork route, because I didn't feel like I had the confidence at that stage to start reaching out to my network directly. I think too, there's also this shame associated with being a tech founder, but then also doing work on the side. It makes you look like Abby's startup must be failing if she's reaching out to do side gig work. Or if she's not all in on her business, what's the likelihood of success for this startup? So I kind of wanted to be a little covert about it. And I think that's a big reason I went to Upwork, because I was like, okay, then maybe I don't need to DM a lot of my former colleagues or friends of friends to understand if their brands need help with marketing. So that's another reason I took to Upwork first, because I think it preserved a little bit of my anonymity. I will say, and I think this is an important point to make too, going through Upwork and just venturing out into consulting in general, especially if you've had like a decade's plus worth of experience in corporate, you might find yourself doing work through consulting that feels a little more executional than what you were doing prior. Right? Because you're now working with companies who don't have the resources. Like I was at the point in my career where I was used to coming in with a strategy, and then there'd be other folks on the team that could implement that strategy and deal with execution.
Great point.
When you're working directly with these companies and they're probably paying you to do the strategy and the execution. And it can be sometimes a little bit of an existential experience, because you're thinking, oh, am I stepping back in my career by going back into this, kind of more executional capacity? But I think there's so much to be said for being hands-on keyboard and being intimately familiar with the day-to-day of what it takes to do this job is actually really powerful and helps you build a more resilient career too. Because what we're finding too is, I've experienced this at companies. Sometimes when you rise too far to the top, you can become a little bit obsolete because you don't understand the inner workings of how the job gets done. So I tried to look at it as, well, this is actually opportunistic for me because I had worked at Facebook. I hadn't run a Facebook campaign in a really long time. When I got back to running Facebook campaigns for my clients, I realized I'd only been out of Facebook for like a year and a half at that point. So much had changed within Ads Manager. There was so much additional automation. There was all these different campaign types. And I thought to myself, well, this is actually really good, because if I want to continue to market myself as someone who's proficient in Facebook ads marketing, I need to know what the product is, right? To have this intimate familiarity with the product. So I had to kind of reframe it. It wasn't so much that I wasn't confident. It was that I felt it was a humbling experience. And then it was something that I looked at as a learning opportunity, which is, I think, folks who are venturing out into their freelance journey should look at it like that. I think the other side of that I will say is it can be very difficult to maintain confidence as an entrepreneur. So one of the things I do encourage folks to do, and sometimes I've had to remind myself, is continue to, even if you're speaking with a client, right? And it feels like the deal is done and they're going to sign you on, continue to build your pipeline of potential prospects. Like never stop doing business development, never stop content marketing yourself, never stop just taking that call with that person that might need marketing help down the line, because whether it's an offer from a corporate giant or it's a contract offer from a small business, the deal isn't done till it's done. And the beauty of continuing to say yes to opportunities like that is it helps you build your confidence and it builds your ability to say no. And I know, Sean, you and I have talked about this before, where there might be a point in your portfolio career or your entrepreneurial journey where you feel like maybe money's tight and you feel like you just need to say yes to every prospective client that's coming in. And then you end up working with clients that like don't respect your time, or they're not sticking with some of the precedents that you set earlier on in terms of job scope. And if you don't have a lot of other things lined up, you might not feel like you have the agency or the confidence to push back on that client and say, this is out of scope or this isn't working. And so that I think what's really powerful in a way that you can build confidence over time is by just continuing to remain open to opportunities and not feeling like you ever need to rely on any particular deal to come through.
I love that. I will be clipping that because there are so many people that need to hear that and understand it. Now, we talked about the professional side of it and just the confidence on that side, but there's also the emotional well-being. And I know we've had those conversations where you have to figure out how to be able to balance these things out, because now that means chances are you're relying on, if you have a partner, you're relying on that partner to kind of carry the weight for a little bit while you try to figure out your next move. I love what you said about Upwork as far as it also being something where you can build up your confidence. Let's not forget that it's also something, this is where people get their testimonials and things like that, because so often when people are starting out, nobody really wants to be the first person. It's something where if you can show proof of concept, if you can show that you've been doing different things and it's not a fluke, then it's something where you can start to have more of that conversation. I'm a lover of the process. So I have always wanted to learn enough about each part of the process so that if I ever ended up in that situation, I can say it's less of a step back and it's more of an opportunity to learn the full scope of what needs to get done. Because when you understand the full scope, if someone throws a curveball and they say, well, I actually need you to take on this role as well. When you're looking for a corporate, if you're trying to be on a corporate side, one of the things that I noticed was the larger corporations, they have a very specific job for you to do. And you notice when you start working with the smaller boutiques and startups, you get to wear a lot of hats. So I worked for the larger companies where they had a very specific job. And if you stepped outside of that job, you would actually almost get reprimanded, where they would say, no, you're only supposed to be doing this. If you do that, then you're taking somebody else's job, or you're messing in the process that we have in place, the structure. But when it comes to the smaller jobs, you get to wear those different hats. And if you've had that experience, then it's something where it's to your advantage, because when you go out and you're on Upwork or something like that, you probably have a better understanding of more of the process because you've been involved in more of it. If you've never been exposed to that part, this is a great way for you to be able to gather that experience. There are a lot of people that get trained on platforms and things like that. They put it on the resume, they go to get a new job, and what you realize is they taught you how to be able to do that work on that platform for their job, the way that they do it. But the moment that you go into a new job, they have their own process. So where you're saying you're an expert in it, you might not be an expert in it. You're an expert in how to do it the way that the other company did. So all of these things kind of bring it back to understanding not just how to be able to do the job, but understanding the process enough to be able to say, well, it can be done different ways. Am I comfortable seeing it from different angles that allow me to be able to go out? And that can build your confidence up. So don't just learn how to do something the way that they're telling you how to be able to do it. Look at the other ways that it can be used, and that will arm you for the things that may come up. There are some people that are going to be on the corporate side, still have their job, and they're fine. And then what happens if you're not? You want to kind of prepare yourself for that. So I know we talked about it in the past where I want to be able to walk into a room and no matter who's in the room, I want to be able to hold a conversation with them. So when it was the advertising side, I knew that ad ops was going to be the ones that actually ran the sprints and put everything in motion. So I needed to learn how to be able to create like the line items. I needed to understand what went into their jobs because it made it easier for me to have those conversations. So this is a good time for people to start learning what the other departments do, how it aligns with what they're doing, because when you can understand that, if you step out on the Upwork, if you step out on the Fiverr, if you step out on your own, or you find yourself out on your own, you're more armed for being able to face this world than if you only know how to be able to do it that one way.